Thank you, everyone, for finding your seats. I wanted to mention one resource page that you did not get in your packet. We didn't make it in time. I am going to leave this important page on the table over here. It includes a lot of the forms from Panel 1, links to other resources, and a lot of the prayers that Father Matthew gifted us with are all included in terms of links on this page. So I'm going to leave this page, which is called, very clever title, Resources. I'm going to leave it on the table over here. So be sure and pick one up on the table over here. Yes?
Did Father Lawrence mention a handout?
That's a different handout.
That's come from my book. This thing.
I'm not, I don't think so.
Okay, just a little bit more, and then we'll get to questions. Mortuary costs run maybe $4,500 to $6,000, depending on what you want. It could be less. But, for us, because we tend not to embalm, it will include transportation, refrigeration, casketing, washing, dressing, cosmetics, if you want that. And then there's another side, extras or death certificates are $24 each. They add up. And so it's good to ask at your bank or a place, who wants a copy, who will accept a copy, and who wants the real thing. So you're not buying a whole bunch of them ahead of time that you didn't need to do. This was really interesting, and this was from Laura. There's an option for an out-of-area protection plan. You told me this, Laura, right? And if you're an avid traveler, it's $499, but if you died somewhere else, it's super expensive to get you back. So that is an option. And then at the end of this, I didn't include taxes because but California takes taxes on a lot of these things, of course. Yeah, death and taxes. So next page, church expenses. Our memorial luncheon or mercy meal, you have some options with that. You can hire a caterer, you can do restaurant takeout, you can make the food yourself, you can ask for help and potluck it if you wanted with people, but expect to pay at least probably $10 a person if you cook it yourself, and it includes beverages. And you have to make sure here at least that you have a setup crew and a takedown, a cleanup crew. And the hall is available for members who are current in their tithing. Otherwise, there's a fee. The contact person is Debbie Busey, right here, Deborah Busey. She's the event manager, and then she'll be able to tell you what's available to you in regards to the kitchen in the hall. A lot of people ask about the honor. What do we give the priest? What do we give the choir? And so at a minimum, I would say for the priest, it's $250 and the choir $150. And then to think of planned giving, sometimes you think of planned giving and you think, oh, you have to have thousands and thousands of dollars to do that, but everything helps. If you've died, church has lost a stewardship, every month. And so just anything would help our church to keep it going and to keep it vital and to help the next generation. Alternatives to costs. My biggest concern with this was that people have waited a super long time. They're older now. They don't have a lot of money. And then what do? Right? Because the costs are substantial. So like Father Tate was talking, you could keep a loved one at home if you wanted to and do everything yourself. That is legal in California. There's nothing illegal about that. And there are a lot of sites online that tell you, and I've listed them here, for you if you wanted to look. They tell you what the process is, and that's an option. You could have somebody make your casket, and you could decorate it as you see fit. You could get your own transportation if you know somebody with a truck. You could have a simple meal instead of, like fruit and sweets and coffee, but all that really can, help bring the price down if that's an issue. And then at the very bottom, I did a sample cost mock-up with everything, and it came to $19,450 a person. Now, some of those costs can fluctuate, but it's, you have to prepare. And those costs are only going to go up. So I encourage you to go to that back table and sign up to get some information. Yes,
I
Mark?
just wanted to make a comment. We prepaid our funeral expenses through Daniels and also through Pleasant Hill. But Daniels was gracious enough that they allowed us to include an amount for the memorial luncheon, for the honorarium for the priest, and an honorarium for the choir. So that money is already set aside and paid. So if we both would pass away, there'd be money already there available. And with their plan, what you pay them earns interest. And that interest kind of helped cushion some of the additional costs, like the caskets. We included money for caskets for the monastery. And, that price will go up. So hopefully we'll be able to get a lid, for the casket. But no, so you can include all those, we were able to include all those extra expenses in what we actually prepaid so that it's not going to have to be worried about when the actual time comes.
I think they help with so many things behind the scenes that we don't have a clue about what, how they can help people. And there are many things that they're very willing to do. I mean, I remember Laura was saying, somebody said, I don't have a suit for somebody. And, they're there to help you in any way that they can. So I would like you to think of it that way. The last thing I put in here, not for us in here, but for your children, maybe, or your young people, is about life insurance. And I just put a couple of examples here. It's a term insurance. I did it for $500,000, which seems like a lot of money, but not in Sonoma County. If you have a house and you have to pay a mortgage and you've got to, do things. So for a 38-year-old female, it costs roughly, if you're healthy, it costs $39.42 a month. That's having a Starbucks every day. And then you can look at the numbers, as they go on. They do have something, like our term, Chuck and I, our term insurance ends in 3 years because they didn't have it to age 100 when we got it back in the day. So we'll spend, I think I did the numbers like over the 30 or 35 years, over $80,000 on our life insurance. And it's, it was there to protect our family, right? And to do everything that we need. But it's gone. They now have life insurance. It's a level term. It goes to 100 years. And some of those companies will allow you, if you're ill, and you have a terminal illness and you have 6 months to a year, you can take half of that insurance to help with costs, and then the other half is the life insurance. So it's something to check into. But at least you know that somebody's going to collect. Somebody's going to get some money at the end. You end up spending a lot of money because for a 38-year-old female, it comes to $222.50 a year, which, over 30 years is a lot of money, but somebody in the family is going to get it, and it'll pay for your funeral too, most likely. So, yes.
I know, my wife and I did the same thing many years ago. It's just good to know that they do have a cutoff date. If you're over 50, they won't do it. But under 50, people can still take out these life terms.
For term insurance? Yeah. It goes past 50. You can do it past 50. it doesn't hurt to look into it if you're, but especially for kids, when it's cheap and when they're healthy. That's the key. When they're young, it's cheap and they're healthy. So, all righty, that's it. We're going to open to questions for our fathers, for our table in the back. Also, they're the experts. I'm not, so you can direct your questions to them.
Thank you, Tom. Well, we have some time before we conclude, so now's the time for questions. Anything off the top of your head? Father Matthew wants to add some things.
I didn't realize that people from the funeral homes were here when I threw you under the bus. But I noticed that Father provided fruit for throwing. So if you wish to do that, I'll accept it.
Yes.
My husband and I were members of another Orthodox church, OCA, for a number of years, and we went to funerals there, and our son passed away when we were going to another Orthodox church. And one thing that I noticed was that the priest that was advising us at the time he passed away, and the other funeral, many of the other funerals, was to have the funeral service at the funeral home instead of at the church. And I really wanted to have the funeral at the church, but he really persuaded us to go to the funeral home, partially because it would be a long way to transport the body for the funeral and then back up closer to our home for the burial. Is that acceptable practice in?
You see it happen that way in many places. Back east, it's really common to have the wake at the funeral home, a time where the family can be just with the deceased, and then visitors, other family, friends, parishioners come to pay their respects, and there's a panikhida, and then the body's taken to the church the next morning. The way we prefer it here, of course, I mean, we like to have the panikhida here. We'll read the Psalms all night if we can. We have if that gets organized, and then the funeral the next morning. But it can happen the other way too. I mean, I'll do funerals. I'll hear about someone that passed away. They're not parishioners. Never heard of them before, but the family calls, so I go, and the funeral will just basically take place at the funeral home. So one has to be flexible, I think. Yeah. Not to disrespect our distinguished guests, Wes and all the others. Wes, welcome. Nice to see you here. But it is possible to, someone reposes at home, for our funeral team, which Serge Anderson, he's in charge of the men that come to do that ministry. He calls the dead team, which, I try to dissuade him from using that. Yeah, he's practical. So our funeral society, our ministry, they can go to the home, they can prepare the body, they can put the deceased in the coffin, and if you have, you can bring the body to the church yourself in a minivan. I think you have some kind of permission from the county coroner to do that. You would know, all of you probably, but that's possible. Father Matthew, have you had experience with that?
Yeah. Typically, when someone dies at home, we'll do kind of a cleanup, prepare the body in the cleanup sense. But usually the main preparation we do the day before or of the funeral at the funeral home.
Same here.
Yeah, so they give us a room and all the things that we'll need, and we come in, and they're very helpful with it. We have a funeral home that we use now that knows what we want. So, and I would say as an aside, we have older people in our parish from different backgrounds. They want the full thing. They want to be embalmed. They want all of that. We don't resist that or give them a hard time. It's just what they think should be done. And so occasionally the funeral home will actually make some money on us. But generally, they don't make very much, but they get all of our funerals, so they're okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe this is the first time Father Matthew's seen this little handout, but maybe we'll just quickly go through it, and that will generate some questions. Just like, I've got 14 little points that I tried to summarize. Steps after the death of a loved one. So the first thing is that the pastor should be informed immediately about the repose of the person. And I would go to that place, whether it be night or day, it doesn't matter what the hour is, at home or at the hospital, and I would do the first service there where that person has died. So that happens, and I get the call in the middle of the night, I'm happy to do it. It's my privilege to do that. Yes, Ray.
Am I correct, it wouldn't be best if, somebody is getting close, we think, can you please come over and...
Yes, the question is someone getting close, and definitely that happens frequently too. I go to read the prayers for the departure of the soul from the body, and if possible, give communion to the person.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing that I would warn you is very often when you do the prayer of separation of the soul from the body, it happens within about an hour. So better be ready to say goodbye.
Or what happens, the person lives another 6 months.
Yeah, right.
Happens to me. I don't know, God doesn't hear my prayers, but, so,
Maybe they looked over there and got scared and came back.
that's true. After that, the members of the St. Seraphim Burial Ministry, also known as the Dead Team, are informed by the priest about the repose of the person. The members of the burial ministry come either to the home or to the mortuary, and we're very grateful to the mortuary allowing us to do that, to wash, anoint, dress, and prayerfully, there's psalms read, prepare the departed one for the funeral and burial. This is a sign of love and care and respect for that person's body. As Father Matthew made clear, this is what we see in the gospel. Jesus was taken down from the cross. He was cared for by the myrrh-bearing women and Joseph and Nicodemus. Number 3, and we're flexible here. All kinds of things happen, so it's fine. But ideally, this is what this is about. Ideally, the burial ministry members will not use cosmetics unless it's absolutely necessary. I've got some stories I'm not going to share with you about that. And neither will the deceased be embalmed or cremated unless that's a necessity after a week or something like that. I go on the advice of the professionals. I don't push anything. The funeral director can be asked to help close the eyes and seal the lips. Question came up earlier about organ donation. Now, the idea seems laudable. Many cases, it's life-saving for a grievously sick person. But as time has gone on and this industry is growing up around this thing, I don't think it's alarmist to reconsider this question. Because in some places, humans are being used for harvesting. And this is a terrible, terrible thing. I just wonder about the abuses that can come, and they do, because there's a lot of money involved. And if you follow the money, it's not good.
Well, literally speaking, if you are an organ donor and say you're 40, not older people because our stuff's all run out, but if you're a younger person, at the end of what they do, you can end up with a little pile of bones and not much more. Because they take the skin, they take the eyes, they take the organs, they take just about everything.
Yeah, and what are you going to have for your funeral?
Yeah,
So
it's not pretty.
in that case, they better supply the lid to the coffin. Remember that the person is still the person. It's not all of the person. Father Matthew was very clear. I appreciate this. The body's not a husk or a prison. It may not be the best part of the person, and if it is, that's kind of sad, but it's still the person and the body that God created with the soul at that very moment of conception. So, by the way, on another point, burial societies were very popular with Orthodox parishes early on in the early 20th century because it was a mutual aid society. for poor people, Orthodox people that had come from Eastern Europe or wherever. They couldn't afford, they didn't know what to do. So it was like an insurance program that these parishes put together. Number 4, the body of the deceased is brought to the church. It's nice to supply a moment or two where the family can be alone. And then we set the time, number 5, we set the time for funeral services. You can arrange that with me, hopefully. Sometimes I'll get a call from somebody on the East Coast, they want a wedding here on such and such a day next year, or, in 6 months, and they've booked the reception hall and everything, and can't do it for some reason, so it's a disaster. So check with me, please. Number 6, ideally, I hardly ever see it done this way, but ideally, the funeral should be arranged to be held on the 3rd day after death. County coroner never signs a certificate that soon, right? Just doesn't happen. But that would be nice if that could happen. That is the tradition of the church. Number 7, the evening before, we have a panihida. That is a brief service, usually about 6 or 7 p.m. Families come, it's quite beautiful, a word is said in a homily. The next morning at 10 or 11 p.m. the funeral can take place. A.M., 10 or 11 a.m. Yes, you can have it in the middle of the night if you want to. Yeah. Father Matthew, want to add anything to that?
That's normal.
Normal. Offerings to the church might be made to the Memorial Funeral Fund. We have one. Right now, someone gave $5,000 last year, so that's what we have in that. It will be used for those who cannot pay for their own funeral. Flowers would be appropriate, but I would say don't spend a lot of money on flowers. Put the money towards where it's going to do some good for someone else. Number 9, traditionally, the coffin is open for the service, unless there's some injury or some other issue. Coffin is brought in, and the feet face the altar. So as if that person would get up, they'd be facing the iconostas. An icon should be placed in the coffin with the person. I've been to funeral homes, went to one like 2 years ago with my son Alex. He and I went to serve a funeral for a gypsy family, and there was in this man's hand fan dollar bills, baseball cap, pack of cigarettes, football. I don't know what else was in there. And it's a little late for me to go in there and start taking stuff out. So I didn't know the family, and during the whole service, they were talking and chatting. And someone was making a little basket and wrapping it with tissue and tying it off and then stuffing it behind the guy's head. I don't know what it was, but it was interesting.
Gypsies.
And after the service, so the gentleman, the brother, came up and he gave me something for an honorarium, and Alex sang, and he's giving him like, it's 20, 40, 60. He says, is that enough? Is that enough? It's like, what do you say? No. So the lesson is icon in the coffin with the person. Maybe a prayer rope would be suitable. We place a wreath upon the head. It says, holy, holy, holy. This is the sign of victory. This person is following Christ into the grave and will also overcome and destroy death. 11, invite other priests and deacons to come, but let me know, so actually I can do the inviting. So it would be rude for them, they would be awkward, feel awkward just showing up. During the service, the priest gives a homily, a sermon. There are no eulogies in our church services. But when we have the memorial meal, that's the time for remembrances and eulogies, and we want to stretch that out as far as possible. At the conclusion of the funeral, everyone comes forward. we give the last kiss, we pay our respects, the coffin is closed, and we walk out with the censer and the choir, and we go to the cemetery where there's a brief Trisagion service. It's really quite short. And as the priest says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all that dwell therein. We put dirt because, remember, we were made from dust and ashes, and God even owns that dirt and that grave. So we all put some dirt in there and participate as much as we can. And then there's a memorial meal afterwards, if possible. Would you like to add?
Yeah, I just, some of the guidelines that we have toward how we do funerals are really important. I'm sure they were learned by, people learned these by problems in the past. When I was very young Orthodox priest, or early in my priesthood, I was reading some of the canons and guidelines around funerals, and it says lay people cannot speak at a funeral. And I thought, having grown up Protestant, I thought, gosh, everyone gets up and, tells about how great Joe was. But, and, I learned more about that as time went on, but I'll never forget, we had a little boy who was, our parish runs a shelter for domestic violence. And so there was a little boy who was killed by his father. And he was about 10 years old, so it was very emotional, very difficult thing. And so we had the funeral, and then we went to the cemetery. And so the sister of the aunt of the little boy, sister of the mom, she says, Father, can I say something? And against my better judgment, I said, yeah. And she goes, he's here. She went through this, he's here with us now. I'm going to sing to him. Out comes the guitar. Oh. So I thought, okay, good reason for that.
Yeah.
How old are our services?
Oh, much can.
Maybe you have some advice for people who are Orthodox, whose families are not Orthodox. My mother's Orthodox, my younger brother's Orthodox, I have 4 other siblings. She's 95, so I've been talking to my siblings, but whenever I talk to them, I kind of assume that they know what I'm talking about. And they all kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about things that Orthodox people would just take for granted. This is what's going to happen after mom dies. They have no idea. They just don't seem to. And they kind of look at me like, well, maybe you should tell us about this. So are there resources, or would you have any advice about things that you might say to siblings that are not Orthodox? Or any kind of, any ideas there?
Yeah. Well, just generally speaking, you're the resource. I think if you just take the time to sit down and explain, this is what the funeral will look like. Because if they know that in advance, they won't feel shocked by anything or put off, usually, by anything. But there's a corollary to it, and that is that, very often we deal with people who die who are not Orthodox. Their wife is, the husband isn't. Maybe they're not Christians, maybe they don't have any particular faith or something like that. But there's a saying that for some priests, we say that my parish is the world. And for others, the world is my parish. And I think the second one is accurate, because I don't feel like I'm a priest just to Orthodox Christians, but I am all the time everywhere. I feel a real need to minister in those settings as well. And so I've spent a lot of time talking with our bishop about situations like that, and, getting his blessing, never using the church, but, like having something at a funeral home that we're able to do, because, it really helps the family, to do a thing like that. And so that comes up more often than you would think. And I think it's important that we reach out at those times, and even sometimes involve the parish at a meal or something like that. Done that a lot of times, and the families never forget it. So it's something that we can do. Something else came to mind there. It'll come back later. Is that helpful, Ann?
Yes, thank you.
This is more of a business question,
Speak up, so,
but it's going to be for them.
okay.
There's going to be costs incurred, I'm sure. With their burial policy involved, if the policy was given to you guys, would you access the funds directly, relieving the family of having to do all that?
Yes, I'm sorry, are you speaking to the cemetery?
Yes, I'm sorry. Whatever costs are incurred, there's going to be a burial policy involved. So the question is, if you were given the policy, could you handle the business aspect, accessing the funds directly from the insurance company? Or is that something that we have to do?
We write insurance policies and assign ourselves as beneficiary if it's to pay for burial
There's a policy that
that you have on your own.
Well, I have somebody's burial policy, not my wife. I have somebody's burial policy, and then with, the question is if you were given the policy by me, that would relieve one burden of me having to go to the insurance company and say, hey,
So I'll answer that since I've been in insurance since 1996, it's been a while.
Every insurance policy typically needs a death certificate to file a claim.
right,
Typically.
right.
So we have the funeral service separate from the cemetery. Okay, that's very important to understand. In most cases, again, it depends, right? The attorneys say all the time. So with a funeral home, if you purchase an insurance policy, typically the costs are locked in at today's cost. And the funeral home is the first beneficiary if they perform the services. If you have your own insurance policy, you can check with that company to see who the beneficiary can be changed to.
Okay.
So, typically a funeral policy with a funeral home is liquidated upon the signature of a funeral director. We don't have to wait 2 weeks to get a death certificate. Okay, so it's a big difference there.
Okay.
So, if in doubt, give me a call.
Someone asked about the antiquity of the funeral service. Well, as a funeral service, I'm not entirely sure, but I know the hymns that we sing in there from St. John of Damascus go back to the 700s. There aren't church service books that exist from before that time where you can just kind of look through, even though we have writings from the Holy Fathers from, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. But yeah, so we imagine that a lot of that goes back probably earlier, and maybe up to the 14th century.
I could toss a little thing into that as well. My wife and I have some really close friends who are Jewish, and her father died, and so we were invited to go to the funeral at the synagogue. And so we were there at the synagogue, and I was listening to the service, and I turned to my wife and I said, wow, they use the same psalms we do. And my wife says, no, we use the same psalms they do.
Right.
So,
3,000 years old.
yeah.
I have on the very last part of panel 2, there's under burial arrangements, there's creating an obituary. And I'm curious why that's there.
Do I say something about obituary?
I don't know if oh, go ahead, please. Oh, do you want to? Well, I could, by the way, if it relates to this, I can tell you what not to do, one thing not to do. Okay, so when my mother died before my dad, and so my dad ordered the headstone and had her name on there and his name, all of that. And so under her name, he put church organist. Under his name, he put Navy pilot, because he thought that was the high time of his life. He really wanted to stress that. Well, when my sisters saw it, they freaked out. They said, Dad, what about loving mother or church organist?
Yeah.
So you might want to consult the girls.
Right.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say that, you know, back in the day, people did obituaries all the time. That's how they found out. I mean, they still do it now, but not as much because people don't read the paper as much as they used to. So lots of times you'll see Legacy. People will go on Legacy and you can look up. Or if you have an obit, you just have to realize that you're paying for every single word and space, I think, right?
They're very expensive
And
now.
they're extremely expensive. If you see somebody with a long obituary, they've spent a lot of money on those. But it was to tell people, you know, that somebody's passed away so they could go to the funeral.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but no one reads obituaries until they're about 55. And then they start reading them all the time, and they look at the dates.
Right.
They're also good in ancestry.
They're also what?
They're also good for people who do ancestry research. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff from the past, from the newspaper, that the obituaries have been logged in, and you don't know if people are going to be looking for us, 200 years from now or something, and they want to fill us in on their family tree. So having an obituary out there published could be helpful.
Yeah. I would say also that death certificates are really interesting because if you have a few that go back, you might be wondering who your relatives are, and they're right there. It's showing their names lots of times, your grandparents and then their parents.
Ready to wrap it up? Well, my thanks to Stephanie for the initial idea, to Daphne for all her research into part 2 there, considerable, and her delicious lunch. Thank you, Daphne. To Alondria and James and to Stefan. By the way, the video and handouts will be available digitally. At some point, you'll be informed of that, so you can watch those. So thank you, Stefan. And especially my thanks to Father Matthew for his insights and his experience and the history that he brings to it. He's going to be with us this evening and tomorrow for Divine Liturgy, too. So I asked him to preach, so I'm off the hook for tomorrow. And thank you all for being here.